The record begins with a sound the archive had never catalogued before: 3 descending notes, blown once, in a room where the conquered expected silence. Tessel had documented 340 containment incidents across 11 years of fieldwork. In 338 of them, her throat patches dimmed by the 12th entry. The clinical distance that made her useful to the Melodry archive settled in early like a second skin, and she would write the rest from behind it. Numbers, behavioral classifications, outcome codes. The patches would pulse during the initial shock of a scene and then quiet as methodology took over. They had not dimmed yet. She was loading this file for the 47th time, and her patches were cycling through their full range with the irregular rhythm of something she could not process into a box and close. The file was labeled Cathara Incident 7 Pelhari. It had been accessed more than any document in the Melodry archive's 900-year history, more than the founding compact, more than the record of the Velhari silence, more than anything Tessel had written. She had arrived at Cathara way station expecting to document a termination. What she documented instead was this: a human hull systems technician named Marin Voss standing in a room with a Tier 1 classified creature raising a small bone whistle to her lips. The conquered species containment division had issued 14 kill orders against this species in the past 12 months alone. Marin Voss had no legal standing, no xenobiology credentials, no weapon. She had negotiated 72 hours from an enforcement director who had every authority to deny her, and spent those hours doing something the archive had no category for. The creature crossed the chamber in 10 seconds. Its dorsal stripe moved from deep copper to pale gold. Nobody spoke for 43 seconds after that. Tessel knows because she counted them, which is something she had never done before. She stopped writing for 43 seconds. This is the record of how it began. The part that comes next, the part where the whole galaxy stops talking, that's still ahead. Stay close. Cathara way station smelled like recycled coolant and the ghost of 7 different food cultures drifting up from the lower refectory. It was bolted to the underside of a gas giant's upper atmosphere shelf, the planet's amber light filtering through the hull plates at a permanent low angle, giving every corridor the quality of late afternoon even at station midnight. Tessel noticed it because she noticed everything. That was the job. She had arrived 3 hours into the lockdown, cleared through the emergency perimeter by her archive credentials. The sequence of events that had led to the lockdown was not what she expected. It had begun with a cargo manifest, an entry reading, inorganic thermal container, sealed, contents, mineral composite samples, class 7 non-biological. The container had arrived on a hauler registered to a Bren-flagged shipping collective, one of 7 known fronts for exotic cargo trafficking in the outer transit corridors. The Concord's Customs Division had flagged the collective 8 months prior and recommended enhanced inspection protocols. The recommendation was still pending administrative review. The container had cleared the docking check in 4 minutes. Inside it was a juvenile Pelhari. Every archivist in the field knew the species by reputation. 6-limbed, fast, bioluminescent dorsal stripe that shifted color with emotional state, secondary jaw capable of exerting force sufficient to compromise light hull plating. Tier 1 lethal across all Concord registered stations. In 60 years of that classification, the Containment Division had issued 1,400 lethal orders. Every single one had been carried out, not one had been appealed. The reputation was enough to explain the flat ears on every Quilhari crew member Tessel passed, the way they moved close to the walls, the way station manager Corvin, a broad-shouldered Quilhari with dense gray fur going silver at the jaw, stood at the security monitoring station with his hands pressed flat on the console as if holding it down. What she did not expect was the human. Marin Voss was not a person who commanded attention. Medium height. A dark work jacket with a Hull Systems patch on the left shoulder, worn enough that the embroidery had softened to a blur. Her voice, when Tessel first heard it through the corridor comm, was flat in the specific way of someone whose voice does not rise when other people's voices do, not calm exactly, more like the calmness was structural. The only unusual thing about her was the whistle. It hung from a cord around her left wrist, small, cylindrical, pale yellow-white in a way that spoke of age and handling. Tessel noted it as a personal effect of unidentified function. She would learn later that it was carved from the leg bone of an earth animal called a crane, that Marin's grandmother had drilled 3 holes into it by hand to produce 3 descending notes, and that the cord was the 3rd one fitted to it. The previous 2 had worn through from decades of the same habit Tessel was watching right now. Marin's right hand moving to the whistle when she was thinking, closing around it without looking. Just holding it. Corvin was speaking to her over the comm, His sentence length had gotten very short. "Orders are clear," he said. "Station seal is active. You go to your designated safe zone." "I've reviewed the security footage," Marin said. "The creature is injured. The dorsal stripe is reading distress, not aggression. I want to go to Sub-Bay 14. "That is not a request I can approve." "I know," she pocketed her display. "I'm noting that for the record." Tessel found her hand moving toward her documentation instrument. The patches at her throat were doing something irregular. Marin Voss had already been in Sub-Bay 14 for 2 hours before Tessel arrived. She had gone before the record could catch up with her. The sub-bay was a maintenance dead-end. Hull pressure gauges, a ventilation secondary relay, broken equipment in corners, the particular silence of a room not built for anyone to stay in. Tessel pulled the security footage and watched it in real time, which is not how she usually reviewed incident recordings. She did not watch 31 minutes of a human sitting on a metal floor with a whistle in her lap and a ration bar she was eating very slowly, while a six-limbed creature pressed into the far corner with its dorsal stripe blazing copper red. She watched all of it. The creature's sound had no classification in the standard Concord Behavioral Index. Cross-referenced later against Pelhari vocal catalogs from the species' homeworld, the closest match was a distress call, the call a juvenile makes when it cannot locate its pack. Not a threat. A specific kind of panic that in its natural context would bring the entire family unit running. Nothing came running, there was no pack. There was a human on the floor eating a ration bar, and the amber light of a gas giant coming through the hull plates. Marin did not move toward the creature. She ate methodically without interest in the food itself. Her hand moved to the whistle twice, both times she held it without blowing it. The creature watched the whistle. It was the first time in the footage that its attention fixed on something other than the exit points of the room. 31 minutes in, the creature took one step toward her. It stopped, its weight shifting to 3 of its 6 limbs. The dorsal stripe was still copper red but dimmer, the color of something that has been burning a long time and is running short of fuel. Tessel would write in the archive later that it read as exhaustion. The Pelhari approximation of a held breath finally released. Marin did not move. She just stayed on the floor and let the stillness do whatever it was doing, which was apparently something because the creature took a second step and the stripe shifted another degree toward amber. Tessel realized she had been holding her own breath. Her patches pulsed twice in quick succession. In 338 of 340 containment incidents, the first 12 minutes had determined the outcome. Marin had been in the sub-bay for 33 minutes. The outcome was still undetermined. Something in Tessel's methodology was starting to feel like the wrong tool for what she was watching. Corvin had not logged the standby order. At the point where the log should have recorded a directive to security for forced entry intervention, there was instead a notation, "Hold position pending situational assessment," signed by Corvin, not explained. The security footage showed him watching the sub-bay feed at the same timestamp, ears flat, for 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Then he typed the notation and turned back to the main display without a word. 4 minutes later, Marin's comm buzzed. "This is Cole," Corvin said, not Marin's name. "There is a medical kit at the sub-bay service entrance. Section 14, a outer door, antiseptic and basic wound sealant. This is not an authorization for any action. This is a notification that the kit is there." A long pause. "Thank you," Marin said. "That is all," the comm clicked off. Tessel added this to her working notes, not the official archive, which required more certainty than "I think a Quilhari station manager just smuggled a medical kit through a service hatch without using anyone's correct name." She had a growing working notes section. She did not usually have a working notes section at all. Director Havoc Sorn arrived 4 hours and 17 minutes into the incident. Tall for a Driathi, chitinous plating maintained carefully over a long time. 4 narrow amber eyes in a vertical diamond, moving with the calibrated focus of a species that evolved to track details in low-light mineral tunnels. He walked with the deliberateness of someone who had learned that the weight of each footstep communicated something and had decided to communicate authority. He did not carry a weapon, he carried a datapad. Tessel noted that the datapad somehow read as more threatening. Sorn reviewed the incident log in 4 minutes, the security footage in 2, then he looked up at Corvin. "The technician is still inside." "She is." Corvin's ears were flat. "The lockdown override was unauthorized." "It was." "The hold position notation." Corvin looked at his console. Then, The creature has not moved aggressively in 4 hours. The technician is unharmed. Forced intervention carries a higher risk of triggering the response we were trying to prevent. That is not your assessment to make. I'm aware. Per Conquered Species Containment Protocol, a Tier 1 classification triggers mandatory termination response. The station commander does not have override authority. I know the protocol, Corvin said. The silence between them had a specific texture. Tessel wrote 2 words in her working notes, he knows. Seal the corridor approaches to Sub-Bay 14, Soren said to his response unit. I will speak to the technician. The comm unit outside Sub-Bay 14 had a small scratched observation panel. Through it, Tessel could make out Marin on the floor, the creature 3 meters away. Its dorsal stripe had settled into steady amber. The secondary jaw was retracted. Soren activated the comm. Technician Voss, this is Enforcement Director Havok Soren. You are in violation of lockdown protocol and unauthorized entry of a classified containment zone. I have authority under Protocol 7C to proceed with Tier 1 termination without station consent. I am giving you 60 seconds to exit the bay. Marin looked up at the observation panel, looked back down at the creature. Director Soren, the animal hasn't moved aggressively in over 4 hours. Its dorsal stripe indicates reduced arousal. If you enter this bay with a termination unit, you will change that immediately and the outcome will be exactly what you're trying to prevent. The protocol exists because of the outcome record, not despite it. The outcome record doesn't include this situation. It includes every situation. Tier 1 classification is based on species-level behavioral data, not individual incident assessment. Marin's hand moved to the whistle, she held it. I'm not asking you to change the classification today. I'm asking for 72 hours of supervised observation. If the creature shows any aggression, you carry out the termination order and I take full responsibility for the delay. The protocol does not provide for. The protocol doesn't say you can't, I've read it. It mandates termination response in cases of active threat or confirmed aggressive posture. The creature is not in an active threat posture. If you file documentation stating that you proceeded with lethal action against a visibly non-aggressive animal, with the station's handler physically present and unharmed, while the entire station's security feed is running, that documentation will be reviewed. Silence. I'm not threatening you, she added. I'm describing the paperwork. Tessel in the corridor stopped moving. Her patches were going dark rather than bright, pressing against her throat like pressure. The creature had not moved during this exchange. It was watching the observation panel with what the behavioral files called alert stillness, what Tessel was beginning to think was something closer to paying attention. 1 minute and 12 seconds. Stand by, Soren said into his comm, hold position. He stepped back and looked at his datapad. He did not type anything on it. Tessel wrote in her working notes he understood the paperwork. He is not a man who misunderstands paperwork. The hold position order went into the station log at 4 hours 51 minutes, signed by Soren. Tessel looked at Corvin's earlier notation, the same words, different signature, and her working notes section was now longer than the official record. She had never had that happen before. The Quilhari docking technician's name was Finn. Knew enough to Cathara that the station-issue jacket still sat stiffly on his shoulders. His ears were angled forward, the position Tessel translated privately as can't look away. Is she still okay? Technician Voss is unharmed. And he gestured at his display. The creature's dorsal stripe was amber steady. No, Tessel said. I've never seen a Pelhari before, Finn said. Only the classification files, they show the teeth a lot in those. A pause. She's not showing her teeth right now. No, Tessel agreed. She noted that he had used a gendered pronoun. Not the specimen. She did not know if this was meaningful. She suspected it was. That night, Marin Voss slept on the floor of Sub-Bay 14. The creature 4 meters away making a sound the behavioral files had no category for, a low vibration that seemed to come from the chest, resonant enough to feel in the hull plating. Tessel pressed her hand to the wall outside the sub-bay at 02:17 station time. She could feel it. She sat on the floor of the corridor and opened her data tablet and pulled the incident reports behind all 1,400 lethal classification orders the Conquered had issued against Pelhari in 60 years. She had intended to review the methodology section. She found herself reading the individual case files. Trafficking vessel, private collection. A container not unlike the one on Cathara's cargo manifest. She counted 14 cases before she stopped counting and simply scrolled, and the pattern was there in a way that did not require statistical analysis to see, though she ran the analysis anyway. 94%. Trafficking or habitat displacement. In 94% of 1,400 cases, the violence that triggered the kill order had been preceded by a trafficking or displacement event. The kill orders were the end of a chain the conquered had never traced back to the beginning. Her working notes had exceeded the official archive record by 6 pages. She added another 3. On the second day, Finn came back. He stood outside the sub-bay entrance for 4 minutes before Marin noticed him and opened the comm. "You can come in slowly, don't look directly at her for the first minute, let her smell you first." Finn's ears went flat, then forward. He opened the door. The creature was in the center of the bay now, dorsal stripe amber gold. It watched Finn with the specific attention of something assessing whether a new variable was a threat or not. Finn stopped moving and looked at the floor. The creature took 3 steps toward him, stopped, its nose moved. "Hold out your hand, flat." Marin slid a piece of dried protein ration across the floor to his feet. He held it out, flat-palmed. The creature looked at the food, looked at Finn, looked at Marin. It walked to his hand, took the ration piece delicately and stepped back. Finn's ears went fully forward, his voice was barely above a whisper. I just fed a Pelhari." "You just fed her," Marin said. "She's not the species right now, she's just hungry and still deciding whether you're safe." Finn looked at Tessel's archive recorder mounted in the upper corner and running since hour 1. He seemed to decide something. "I know this is going in the archive," he said, addressing the recorder directly, the first time in her 340 incidents that a station worker had done this during an active containment event. "I just want to say that she's not how the files describe. I don't know what that means exactly." He paused. "But I keep thinking about it." Tessel pressed her hand to the hull plate again. The vibration was still there. The Conquered Tribunal was already scheduled. The galaxy, as Corvin told Marin the following morning, had been watching the archive feed since hour 8, 40 million views, rising. Marin did not react to the number. She finished her ration bar, folded the wrapper and said, "Tell me about the tribunal format." She listened without interrupting, her hand finding the whistle, holding it. The creature mirrored her still, dorsal stripe steady gold, watching Marin's hand around the whistle. Somewhere in the Conquered's administrative infrastructure, 2 pending lethal orders against other species were quietly flagged for review by officials whose names would not appear in any public record. 6 hours before the tribunal, Finn asked if he could stay. He found Marin in the corridor and sat down beside her without preamble. "I want to be there. She took food from me, that means something. I don't know what it means in Conquered legal terms, but it means something and I want to be in the room." Marin considered this, then nodded once and went back to her water. She had not asked him why he wanted to be there or whether he understood the risk. She accepted the fact of his presence the way she accepted most facts, as information to be worked with rather than interrogated. Tessel added this to her working notes under a heading she had created at 3 in the morning. Things Marin Voss does not say. The list was long. 20 minutes before the broadcast, Marin was in the corridor eating a ration bar. The same brand as the first day. She had no prepared remarks. Tessel had asked the previous evening whether she wanted help structuring her statement to the council. "I'm just going to show them," Marin had said. "Show them what specifically?" "What I know, which is that she's not what the files say she is." A pause. "Or, she is what the files say, the files just don't say the right thing." Tessel had written that down. Now Marin finished the bar, folded the wrapper, held the whistle a moment, let it go, and pushed off the wall and went through the door. Tessel followed. The council feed opened at exactly the scheduled time. 15 members across 11 sectors projected in a semicircle across the tribunal's north wall. At the center, Council Chair Petra, a Quilhari of advanced age, her fur completely silver, with the stillness of someone who had spent decades making decisions other people would live with. Director Sorn stood in the observer section, datapad in both hands. Finn stood near the south wall in a position technically violating protocol, his ears fully forward. Chair Petra opened the session. "The council has reviewed the incident documentation and the 94% correlation data compiled from the Conquered's own incident files, which will be entered into this proceeding's formal record." Sorn's grip on his datapad tightened, not visibly. Tessel was watching his hands. "Technician Voss," Petra said, The council has one request before deliberation. You have stated that the specimen's behavior is inconsistent with its classification profile. We would like to see that demonstrated. The chamber went quiet. Marin stood in the center of the room. The creature was to her left, 4 meters away, dorsal stripe gold, steady, unhurried. Tessel watched Marin's right hand. It moved to the whistle. She did not lift it immediately. She held it the way she always held it first, fingers closing around the bone cylinder, the cord looped at her wrist, not to make noise. Tessel had learned to read this pause. It was not hesitation. It was the same thing her grandmother had done. Marin had explained once in the 3-second window before entering a pen with a spooked animal, not composing herself but marking the transition. Acknowledging that what came next required something different from what came before. The chamber was completely still. 15 council members across 11 sectors, Sorn in the observer section, Finn at the south wall, Tessel's throat patches going dark. Marin raised the whistle and blew the first note. The creature's head came up. One note, clean, descending, the kind of sound that did not fill a room so much as clarify it. The creature oriented toward Marin with the total attention of something that had been listening for exactly that frequency without knowing it was listening. The second note. It stood, all 6 limbs unfolding in a single fluid motion, the way something moves when it has decided. Its dorsal stripe began to shift not toward copper, not toward the red of distress, but toward a lighter register Tessel had no classification for. She would spend 2 weeks searching the Pelhari behavioral literature to find it, a pre-conquered xenobiology survey filed in a subcategory called obsolete assessments, uncited in any official document for 40 years. The color was associated with approach behavior toward a trusted pack member. The third note, descending further, softer, the lowest of the 3 holes Marin's grandmother had drilled by hand. The creature walked across the chamber. Not fast, not urgent. It covered the 4 meters in 10 seconds, which is a long time when the entire Concord is watching, and it settled beside Marin and sat, its tail curling once around its own haunches, its head turning to look at the council projection with an expression that Tessel's archive vocabulary could not accommodate, and that she would describe in her working notes later as curiosity about why all the faces were so still. Marin did not look at the camera, she looked down. She scratched the base of the creature's neck, where the scales ran smooth along the ridge between the first and second sets of limbs, and the sound that rose from the creature's chest, the low vibration Tessel had felt through the hull plate at 2 in the morning, the sound the broadcast microphones were not calibrated for and captured anyway, filled the glass tribunal chamber and went out across the relay array to 11 sectors. In the observer section, Sorn's hands were still on his datapad. He had not typed anything. On the council projection, the Dryathi member seated third from the left, a female elder whose formal documentation ring had been on her hand in every Concord session for 22 years, reached up and removed the ring from her finger. She set it on the table in front of her. No drama, just a placement. The ring beside her documentation instruments, her hand flat beside it, her 4 amber eyes fixed on something her framework had not been built to contain. Tessel knew the gesture, every Meladri archivist knew it. The Dryathi performed it at moments of formal witness, acknowledgement that a record had been created the witness could not improve upon by adding their own, an expression of archival deference. She had never seen a Dryathi perform it outside a Meladri archive session. Nobody spoke, Sorn did not move. Finn had both hands pressed flat against the hull plating behind him, his ears straining past the position Tessel had any behavioral category for. Tessel counted the seconds. 1, 2, 5, 12. She stopped writing at second 19 and did not start again until second 44. Call the vote, Petra said. The vote was 9-6. Not the decisive margin that would make an appeal procedurally difficult. 9-6, which meant the trial program would move forward with a dissenting minority opinion attached to every document and outcome assessment for the 6-month evaluation period. The dissenters were not wrong. One success did not constitute a dataset. The demonstration proved something about this individual creature in this specific context with this specific human. It proved nothing about the species, nothing about different handlers, nothing about environments without Tessel's archive recorder running and 40 million people watching. Marin, when Tessel asked her about the minority opinion that evening, was quiet for a moment. Then, they're right that it might not generalize, but it happened, that's what we have, you work with what happened. A flat declarative, a fact to be worked with, the whistle was in her hand. Tessel wrote 4 more pages. Sorn left the glass tribunal without speaking. He walked at his normal deliberate pace toward transit staging, past the junction where Sub-Bay 14's access corridor branched off and stopped. He stood at the entrance to that corridor for 30 seconds. He did not enter. He stood for 30 seconds and then walked on. His datapad screen was dark. Tessel added one line to her working notes. He stood at the place where it started. I don't know what that means for him. I'm not sure my archive has a category for it. She paused. I'm starting to think my archive needs new categories. 3 other conquered stations filed consultation requests within 48 hours of the vote: a transit hub in the Outer Reach, a research station in the Midbelt, a civilian way station with a dangerous species incident pending. All 3 specifically requested human consultation. 2 named Marin Voss. The third named the technician from the Cathara feed. 2 pending lethal orders within the containment division were flagged for review under a category labeled situational reassessment, a category that had not existed in the queue the previous week. Tessel was becoming aware that the story she had come to document, a termination incident, outcome code to be determined, was not the story she was writing. The story she was writing was larger and quieter and had edges she could not yet locate. Finn's transfer request was approved the same day. Secondary handler position, Outer Reach Preserve Station Dalvin 9. Corvin's approval notation was 2 sentences. It contained no commentary. Tessel read it 3 times. On the last morning at Cathara Way Station, Tessel found Marin in the lower refectory. I want to ask you something for the official record. Day 1, Sub-Bay 14, the first 31 minutes. If the creature had attacked you, what would you have done? Marin was quiet long enough that Tessel's patches pulsed twice in the silence. I'd have been wrong, Marin said. About her, about what she was ready for, I'd have been wrong. She looked at her cup. But I'd have been wrong trying the right thing. That part matters less for me and more for whoever came next. If it had gone badly, the record would still exist. Tessel's footage would still exist. The 94% would still be in those files. Someone else would have found it eventually. A pause. I would have just been earlier. Tessel wrote it down verbatim. She did not add a commentary note. Some things did not require one. The departure corridor was long and poorly lit, the amber light from the gas giant giving it the quality of very early morning, the kind of light that has not yet committed to being day. Marin walked ahead, the creature beside her, matching her pace. 6 limbs on a metal deck lighter than the size suggested, the sound of it something Tessel had learned over 3 days to hear as familiar. Finn was behind them, his Dalvin 9 crew badge still too stiff at the collar. Corvin stood at the corridor junction. He had come to watch them go. His ears were in the unclassified position, not flat, not forward, the question he had not finished forming. Marin stopped at the transport hatch. She turned and looked back down the corridor, at Corvin at the junction, at Tessel and her recorder, at the hull plates and the amber light and the long familiar smell of recycled coolant and the ghost of 7 food cultures from the refectory below. She reached for the whistle. Not to call the creature which was already beside her. Not to signal anything or demonstrate anything for any camera or archive or relay array. She raised it and blew 3 notes. One descending into the next, the third note lowest and longest, the way her grandmother had designed it. The sound went down the corridor and off the hull plates and into the ambient hum of the station's ventilation system. And the ventilation took it and the station took it, and the gas giant's light came through the plates, and the sound dissolved into everything. Cathara Way Station was made of coolant and light and the 7 food cultures and the work of the people who kept it running and disappeared. The creature did not move toward the sound, it was already there. Finn reached up and adjusted his collar, a self-conscious gesture, and then stopped and let his hand fall. Tessel's patches, for the first time since she had loaded this file 47 times in the weeks that followed, went still. The transport hatch closed. Corvin stood at the junction until the departure signal cleared, his ears in the unfinished question, watching the place where they had been.